The age of the Mahabharata stood under a wide golden sky, where rivers moved like silver threads and great kingdoms rose with careful law, prayer, and duty. In those days, every ruler knew that honor was not just a word, because honor held the world together. Yet over the eastern horizon, a dark crack had begun to bloom, and people called it the void. It did not burn like fire, and it did not march like an army. It simply opened, then swallowed light, land, sound, and fear itself. Villages near the edge of the rift vanished first, then watchtowers, then whole stretches of road, and soon the sacred order of the age began to wobble. If the void kept spreading, the kingdoms bound by dharma would be broken apart, and nothing would remain in balance. Arjuna was the one chosen to face it. He was a great warrior of the royal house, known across the land for his skill with the bow, his sharp eyes, and his steady hands in battle. Yet what truly set him apart was his hunger to do what was right, even when the path was hard. He wanted victory, but not for glory alone. He wanted to protect the world his family had sworn to guard, and he wanted to prove that strength without discipline was empty. Beside him stood Krishna, his guide, friend, and charioteer, a calm and clever man with dark hair and bright eyes that seemed to see every hidden turn of fate. Krishna understood the deeper danger right away. The void was not just a storm in the sky. It was a force that fed on disorder, doubt, and weakness of will. That meant no ordinary weapon could stop it, and no careless warrior could survive it. The stake was clear. If Arjuna failed, the sacred pattern of the world would be torn apart, and the kingdoms of the Mahabharata age would fall into endless confusion. To meet that danger, Krishna led Arjuna to a hidden shrine beyond a field of broken chariots and bent spears. There, under a stone arch marked with old symbols, waited a celestial weapon wrapped in iron bands and sealed by vows older than any king. It was called the iron-oath blade, a divine weapon that could split the void only if its bearer held perfect discipline in mind, breath, and heart. The weapon was not alive, but it answered to focus as if focus itself were a hand. A priest with white hair and a solemn face explained the rule in simple words. If Arjuna let anger guide him, the weapon would go silent. If fear entered his mind, the blade would become heavy and useless. If he acted for pride, the iron vow would lock forever. Arjuna listened carefully because now he understood the true battle. He was not only fighting the void outside him, he was fighting the wild pieces inside himself as well. The priest placed the weapon in his hands, and for one tense moment it felt cold as winter stone, then warm as a living star. Krishna only nodded and said that discipline was not a cage, but a door. Their first ride into the shattered borderlands showed how fast the world was changing. The sky was split by dark veins, and the ground opened in quiet waves whenever the void drew near. Phantom armies rose from the broken dust, their armor hollow and their faces blurred, as if memory itself had been copied and damaged. These were not true spirits of the dead, but echoes made from fear and war, shaped by the void to confuse and overwhelm. Arjuna and Krishna crossed a battlefield where old war drums beat without hands and chariot wheels spun through empty air like lost moons. Arjuna drew his bow, but Krishna told him to wait. The enemy wanted him to strike in panic. Instead, Krishna guided him through breath, posture, and stillness. Arjuna counted each breath, held his shoulders level, and aimed only when his mind became clear. When he finally loosed his arrow, it flashed with a clean silver line and shattered the nearest phantom ranks. But the void answered at once. A wave of black stillness rolled forward, swallowing the light of the arrow and forcing their chariot back across cracked earth. From that moment, the danger became personal. This was not a battle that could be won by force alone. It would require a warrior who could remain calm while the world tried to break his mind. As they pressed deeper, the void revealed a terrible truth. It was not growing on its own. Someone had opened more wounds in the sky, feeding it with fear and broken oaths. That someone was Vance, a proud warlord who once served the same sacred kingdoms. Vance had learned that dharma kept rulers bound by rules, and he hated those limits. He wanted a world where power decided everything, because in that kind of world, he believed he would never be restrained again. So he made a pact with the void, promising it fresh conflict, shattered loyalty, and endless unrest. In return, the void gave him shadow troops and twisting storms that could erase roads and crush supply lines. Vance did not see himself as a destroyer. He saw himself as the man bold enough to tear apart an old order that he thought had become weak. Krishna understood this motive clearly and explained it to Arjuna in direct words. Vance wanted freedom, but he was only serving a force that would consume him too. That revelation changed Arjuna's anger into something steadier. He no longer fought only to stop a disaster. He fought to protect a fragile balance from a man who had traded wisdom for hunger. The next trial came at the River of Mirrors, where the water reflected not faces but memories. Arjuna saw his own failures, his doubts, and the moments when he had hesitated before hard choices. He saw a version of himself who had chased praise and another who had turned away from responsibility. Those images were not random. The void was using them to break his discipline by filling his mind with shame and noise. Krishna did not fight for him. Instead, he stood beside the water and reminded Arjuna that a warrior could not control the past, only the next choice. Arjuna then closed his eyes, breathed through the fear, and accepted the truth that he was not perfect. He was still worthy of duty. That was the moment the iron oath blade began to glow again. The weapon had not wanted flawless emotion. It had wanted a flawless commitment to return again and again to purpose. With that understanding, Arjuna crossed the river and cut through the mirror glass that hid a path to the void gate. At the gate, the sky had become a torn wheel of darkness, and broken chariots swirled overhead like leaves in a storm. Vance waited there, wearing black armor lined with crimson marks, his dark hair tied back, his face hard with contempt and fear. He stood surrounded by phantom commanders and shards of swallowed light. He believed the void would crown him if he delivered the kingdoms into chaos. But the void had no crown to give. It only widened, hungering for every bond it touched. Krishna spoke one final warning to Arjuna. This was the moment where discipline would become action. Arjuna faced Vance, drew the iron oath blade, and settled his breathing until even the storm around him seemed to slow. Vance struck first with a crushing surge of shadow, and the two forces collided in a burst of wind, sparks, and shattered stone. Arjuna held his ground, not by brute strength but by perfect control. The blade answered his calm with a bright, clean edge that cut through each wave of darkness. Yet just as the void began to retreat, a deeper crack opened behind Vance, and from it came a far greater silence than any battlefield had shown before. Krishna looked toward that widening darkness, and for the first time, even his calm face grew grave. Arjuna had won a first victory, but the true heart of the void was still waking, and the next step would lead him into a danger that neither of them had fully seen. The shrine stood on a cold hill outside a quiet American town called Ash Hollow, where the wind moved through broken stone and empty pine trees like a warning that never faded. Moonlight touched the roof tiles, the lanterns along the path, and the cracked steps that led to the inner hall, where old vows still lived in silence. Inside that hall, the air had changed after the first clash with the void, because the darkness was no longer just outside the walls. It was reaching for the shrine itself, and everyone there knew that if the heart of the void fully opened, the land below would be swallowed in endless fear and stillness. Arjuna stood in the center of the stone floor with his bow across his back, long black hair falling over his royal blue, gold, and white armor, his sharp eyes fixed on the widening crack behind Vance. Krishna stood nearby in yellow and blue robes, his dark hair calm beneath the lantern glow, his kind face serious now, because he understood the danger better than anyone else in the room. Vance stood at the edge of the rupture, a hard-eyed man with dark hair, a sharp jaw, and black armor marked with crimson lines, and his cruel smile showed that he wanted the void to grow stronger, because he believed its power would make him untouchable. The old priest of the shrine, a thin elderly man with white hair and pale robes, watched with a face full of deep sorrow, because he had guarded this place for many years and knew that the iron oath blade had been sealed for one reason alone, to keep it from falling into proud hands that would misuse it. The deeper crack behind Vance widened with a sound that did not feel like sound at all, and then the room seemed to lose part of its own breath. The shadows on the walls stopped moving for one terrible moment, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Krishna stepped forward first because he knew panic would only feed the darkness, and his calm voice cut through the heavy air as he told Arjuna that the void was not just attacking from one opening anymore. He explained that the first waves had been only a shell, a test, and that the true heart beneath them was still waking. The void, he said, did not only want to destroy, it wanted to empty things out until courage, memory, and purpose all felt far away, and that was why the silence felt worse than a shout. Arjuna listened closely because he could feel the truth of those words in his chest. His first victory had been real, but it had only slowed the enemy. It had not ended anything. Vance turned his head with a slow and mocking laugh, and he said that Arjuna was still too gentle for a war like this. He said that fear was the only honest rule in the world, and that the void simply revealed what was already true. The priest raised his thin hand then, and for the first time his voice carried with quiet force as he told the others that Vance had once come to the shrine as a desperate man. He had begged for power after losing everything to his own greed and failures, and the void had answered because it always hunted open wounds in the heart. Vance did not serve the darkness out of loyalty. He served it because he believed control was the only way to stop being hurt again. That truth struck harder than any blow. Arjuna looked at Vance and saw, beneath the armor and pride, a man who had chosen darkness because he feared helplessness more than anything else. But understanding the enemy did not make the danger smaller, because the deeper crack now began to pulse with a slow, black light, and the floor stones around it trembled. From that crack rose shapes that were not fully formed, tall and thin forms made of rippling shadow, each one moving like a thought that had gone wrong. They did not charge in a loud rush. They drifted forward in a patient and terrible way, as if they knew the room would eventually belong to them. Arjuna drew his weapon and stepped into a low stance, his expression focused and steady, while Krishna moved to the side and lifted one hand in quiet guidance. He told Arjuna not to chase the shadows with anger, because the void wanted wild motion and broken rhythm. It wanted him to lose his center. The priest then crossed the stone floor with surprising speed for such an old man, and he reached a hidden basin near the rear wall. Inside it lay the iron-oath blade, wrapped in iron bands and resting in stillness, its silver and blue glow dim and sleeping. The priest said the blade would awaken only for a person who accepted discipline before desire, service before pride, and patience before power. Arjuna looked at the weapon and felt something in himself answer, because he had spent his life training his body, but this trial was asking for something deeper than skill. It was asking for trust. As the shadow forms moved closer, Arjuna took the iron oath blade with both hands, and at once the iron bands began to hum with a clean and sharp note. Light ran through the blade in narrow lines of silver and blue, not wild and bright, but steady, like a river that knew its own path. Yet the weapon did not fully open for him at first. It pushed back against his grip because it was testing his heart as much as his hands. The priest called out that the blade would reject anyone who tried to force it, because a proud hand could never guide sacred power for long. Arjuna closed his eyes for one breath and then another while the shadows crept nearer. He let go of the urge to prove himself, and he remembered Krishna standing beside him, never rushing, never boasting, always seeing the next step before it came. He remembered that real strength was not loud, it was steady, it was careful, it was patient. When Arjuna opened his eyes again, the blade answered. The silver light sharpened, the blue glow spread, and a ring of clear force burst outward, driving back the nearest shadow forms and forcing them to collapse into smoke. Vance staggered a half step, not from pain, but from surprise, because he had not expected Arjuna to master the weapon so quickly. Then he smiled, and that smile was worse than anger, because it meant he had seen a new way to win. He raised one arm toward the crack behind him, and the darkness inside it began to widen again, this time with a slow and terrible patience. He spoke a few low words, and the shrine answered with a deep tremor, as if some locked door far below had begun to open. Krishna's face tightened, and for the first time his calm broke only enough to show concern, because he realized Vance was not just drawing power. He was trying to wake something older than the shadows around them. The priest shouted for everyone to move toward the inner chamber, where an old seal still remained beneath the floor. He said the shrine had once been built to contain the first touch of the void, and that the seal could still hold if the iron oath blade was placed at its center. But the path to that chamber now lay through a storm of moving dark, and Vance stood in the middle of it like a gatekeeper who had chosen his own ruin. Arjuna stepped forward first, not because he wanted glory, but because he finally understood what the moment demanded. He did not need to beat Vance through rage. He needed to outlast him through resolve. The blade in his hands glowed brighter as he moved, and each clean swing of silver and blue light cut a path through the shadows without wasting emotion. Krishna followed close behind, guiding Arjuna with short, clear words, always pointing toward balance, never toward frenzy. The priest moved to the side wall, where he began tracing old sacred markings with shaking fingers, preparing the final seal if Arjuna could reach the chamber. Vance watched them with growing fury, because the calm between Arjuna and Krishna was breaking his control over the room. He had expected fear, confusion, and easy surrender. Instead, he saw trust. That made him more dangerous than before. He slammed his hand against the floor, and the deeper crack answered with a pulse that shook dust from the ceiling. A huge wave of black silence rolled outward, swallowing the lantern light, and for one breath Arjuna could hear nothing at all except his own steady pulse. Then through that hush, Krishna spoke a single warning. He said the heart of the void was now awake, and it had noticed Arjuna. Arjuna lifted the iron oath blade, felt the weight of the oath in his arms, and stepped into the widening dark without fear, knowing that the next challenge would not only test his sword arm, but also the quiet truth he had just begun to learn. And behind him, Vance smiled at the opening crack because he already knew that this battle was no longer about a shrine on a hill. It was about who would control the silence before it swallowed everything, and that answer was still hidden just beyond the light. The hill above Ash Hollow stayed silent, but it was not a calm silence. It was the kind of silence that waited, listened, and pressed against the skin like cold rain. The old shrine still stood on the hill, built from stone that had turned gray with age, while dark pine trees leaned around it like watchers. Below, the town lights of Ash Hollow blinked faintly through the night, small and fragile, as if they already knew that something deep under the shrine had begun to wake. Inside that pressure, Arjuna moved forward with the iron oath blade in his hands, and the weight of the weapon felt less like metal and more like a promise. Arjuna was a young warrior with long black hair, sharp focused eyes, and a lean build trained for battle. He wore royal armor in deep blue, gold, and white, with a flowing cloak and a bow on his back, and he carried himself with calm courage even now. He had come to the shrine to stop the spreading dark, but the truth had become larger than a fight. The shrine was a lock, the void was the thing behind it, and if the lock failed, the darkness would spread into the town and beyond it. Behind him, Vance stood at the broken opening in the stone with a hard stare and a sharp jaw, his dark hair falling against his black armor with crimson details. He wanted the silence hidden in the shrine because he believed it could be shaped into power, and he was ready to use fear, pressure, and lies to claim it. Vance did not serve the dark by accident. He served it because he thought the world was weak, and he wanted to rule the fear that the void created. That was why this night mattered, and that was why every step Arjuna took had to count. Krishna waited a few paces back in the open air near the shrine steps, watching Arjuna with kind, bright eyes and a calm face that never seemed to shake. Krishna was a wise man with dark hair and quiet confidence, wearing yellow and blue robes with simple gold trim. He was not there to fight like a soldier, but to guide like a steady hand at the edge of a storm. He knew the old rules of the shrine better than anyone else, and he understood something that Arjuna was only beginning to feel. The iron oath blade did not answer to anger, panic, or pride. It answered only to perfect discipline because its power was tied to the vow that had sealed the chamber long ago. The priest of the shrine, an elderly man with white hair, a solemn face, and thin shoulders, stood near Krishna with his hands folded inside plain pale robes marked by simple sacred signs. He had guarded the shrine for many years, and his voice had the quiet force of someone who had carried a secret for too long. He told Arjuna that the chamber below held an ancient seal, and the seal was not made to destroy the void. It was made to keep it asleep. If the seal broke, the void would not rush out like fire. It would spread like a thought, like a fear, like a shadow that entered memory and stayed there. That was the true danger, and that was why the priest had kept the old vows for so long. He had never wanted glory. He had only wanted the town to remain safe. Arjuna listened, and for the first time since taking the blade, he felt the full burden of the choice in his hands. He wanted to protect Ash Hollow, but he also wanted to understand the quiet truth that Krishna had been guiding him toward. Strength was not enough. A blade could open a door, but only a clear mind could keep the darkness from using that door. So Arjuna stepped through the widening crack in the shrine floor, and the stone beneath him gave way into a stairwell that sank into the earth. The air changed at once. It grew colder, drier, and strangely still, as if sound itself had been pushed aside. The glow of the iron oath blade became brighter, silver and blue light wrapping around the iron bands as Arjuna held it close to his chest. Each step carried him deeper into the hidden chamber beneath the shrine, and every wall around him was lined with old sacred markings that had been cut by hands long gone. The inner chamber waited below, quiet and sealed, built with one purpose only, to hold back the thing that could not be allowed to roam free. Then Arjuna saw the first sign that the seal was failing. Thin black lines had crept through the stone like cracks in ice, and from those lines came a low ripple of dark motion, not quite smoke, not quite shadow, but something alive enough to make the heart tighten. The void was not here in full, but part of it had already reached through the seal, and it was testing the chamber like a hand testing a locked gate. Far above, Vance smiled. He had not followed Arjuna into the chamber yet, but he did not need to. He had planned for this moment since the hill first opened. Vance believed that if he could stand near the seal long enough, the darkness would recognize his will and bend toward him. He had studied the shrine from old stolen notes, and he knew the priest had left out one detail from the town records. The seal did not only lock the void away, it also locked away a voice, a whisper of command that could either calm the darkness or call it forward. That hidden truth changed everything. Vance had not come simply to break a shrine. He had come to claim the voice and force the void into a shape he could use. This was the reason his hatred felt so cold, and this was why his confidence never faded. He did not think he was evil, he thought he was practical. He thought fear was the only real law. Below him, Arjuna reached the center of the inner chamber and found a stone platform ringed by old symbols. At its heart stood a narrow pillar with a second mark that matched the iron-oath blade. Krishna had warned him that the blade and the seal would only work together if Arjuna stayed calm and honest. No lie, no rage, and no selfish wish could survive inside this chamber. The blade would reject him if his heart turned false. Arjuna understood then that the real test had started before any enemy strike, because the chamber itself was measuring what kind of man he was. Then the darkness moved. It pulled away from the far wall in a slow, wavering wave, and a shape began to form inside it, not a body, but a pressure with intent. The void seemed to breathe, and the chamber answered with a deep tremble that ran through the stone. Arjuna raised the iron oath blade and planted his feet, his cloak shifting behind him as the blue and silver glow fought against the black ripples ahead. He did not charge. He did not shout. He listened to the guidance Krishna had given him, and he breathed once, then twice, until his mind became steady. That steady choice mattered more than strength, because the void fed on panic and doubt. When Arjuna finally spoke, his voice was calm and clear, and the blade answered at once. Light ran through the iron bands, and the sacred marks on the pillar began to shine in return. The seal was not restored by force. It was restored by alignment, as if the chamber itself had been waiting for someone who could stand still inside fear. But the chamber was not healed yet. A heavy sound rolled down from the stairwell above, and Vance stepped into view at the edge of the lower steps, his cloak hanging like a dark banner behind him. His expression was sharp with triumph, because he had found a way to enter after all, and he believed the void was now close enough to command. He looked from Arjuna to the glowing blade, and his eyes narrowed with anger and hunger. He said that the old vows were only chains and that the world needed a ruler strong enough to break them. Arjuna answered by lifting the blade higher, not in rage, but in refusal. That was the moment the chamber changed again. A hidden side wall slid open with a rough stone grind, revealing a narrow passage deeper under the shrine, and every sacred mark around it flared once before fading. The priest gasped because he knew that passage was not on any map he had kept. It was a forgotten route, hidden for emergencies, and if it had opened now, then someone had prepared for this long ago. Krishna turned his eyes to the passage, then to the priest, and the calm guide realized the same hard truth. Someone had not only known about the void, someone had planned for its return. Arjuna stood at the edge of the dark opening, the iron oath blade steady in his hands, and for the first time he understood that the battle in the shrine was only the start. Beyond that hidden path waited the person who had shaped this whole night, and the next truth would be even harder to face. Arjuna did not retreat, but he did not rush either. He stepped toward the passage with discipline in his heart, while Vance followed with a cold smile, certain that the deeper dark would finally bend to him. In that narrow space between light and shadow, the story moved forward, and the silence below the shrine began to speak at last. Below the shrine, the air turned colder, and the stone walls pressed close around every step. Ash Hollow still slept above them, wrapped in dark pines and hard winter wind, but the hidden passage under the hill felt alive with old fear. Arjuna moved first, his long black hair falling over his armor as he walked with a steady breath and a careful gaze. He was a man shaped by duty, and he wanted only one thing now, which was to stop the void before it spread beyond the shrine and into the town. Behind him came Krishna, calm and upright, with dark hair tied back and bright eyes that missed nothing. Krishna did not fight with anger, because he understood that this darkness could not be beaten by force alone. Vance followed last, his dark hair slick with sweat, his hard stare fixed on the path ahead, and his jaw set in a cruel line. He wanted the power below the shrine, not to protect anyone, but to prove that he could command what others feared. The priest of the shrine had warned them that the seal was ancient, that the void answered hunger, and that anyone who tried to own it would only feed it. That warning now hung over the narrow passage like a final breath, because the hidden way was leading them straight to the place where the oldest truth had been buried. The passage opened into the inner chamber, and the sight inside made even Vance slow down for one rare moment. The room was wide and low, carved from black stone, with sacred markings cut deep into the floor and walls. At the center stood a broken ring of metal and stone, and around it drifted a thin shimmer of dark light like a wound that had not healed. This was not a simple room, but a prison built long ago to hold back the void, and every line in the walls showed the cost of that effort. The priest of the shrine stepped in after them, thin shoulders bent, white hair shining in the dim light, and his solemn face carried the pain of a man who had guarded a secret for too many years. He told them that the shrine had never been a place of worship alone. It had been a lock. Long ago, the people of this land had found the void creeping through dreams, bending fear, and taking shape where doubt grew strong. So they had sealed it here, and the iron oath blade had been made as the only weapon that could wake the final seal. Arjuna looked toward the blade with respect because he could feel its strange stillness calling to him, not with greed, but with discipline. Krishna then spoke clearly and explained the real danger. The seal did not simply block a monster. It blocked a hungry force that used anger, pride, and fear to weaken the mind. If someone tried to force it open, the void would not just escape. It would enter the world through every weak heart nearby. That was why the stakes mattered so much now. If the chamber failed, Ash Hollow would not remain safe, and the dark pressure above the shrine would become a spread of living shadow across the land. Vance listened to all of this, and his cold smile did not fade. Instead, it sharpened. He said that all of them were clinging to old fear while he could take control and use the power for himself. He believed that the world only respected strength, and that if he held the iron oath blade, he could master the seal and bend the void into a tool. The priest of the shrine begged him to stop, saying the chamber had been built to punish that very kind of arrogance. But Vance had already decided that warning was only another form of weakness. He raised his hand, and the dark light around the center ring answered him at once. The shadows in the chamber thickened, the sacred markings dimmed, and a deep pulse rolled through the floor. That was the first true twist of the night, because the chamber did not wait for Vance to enter by force. It recognized his hunger and opened wider for it. The old seal had not been broken by accident at all. It had been lured. Vance had not only followed the dark, he had been guided by it, and the realization struck Arjuna hard, because it meant the enemy had been shaping this moment from the start. Arjuna stepped forward before the room could collapse into chaos. He did not swing his bow, and he did not shout, because he knew the chamber wanted panic. Instead, he planted his feet, lifted the iron oath blade from its resting stand, and held it with both hands as the metal bands around it began to glow silver and blue. The weapon did not respond to force. It responded to stillness, and Arjuna found that stillness by drawing one slow breath after another. The blade brightened, and the sacred markings in the floor answered with a faint ring of light. Krishna moved to the side and guided the priest of the shrine away from the center, while also speaking words of focus to Arjuna, reminding him that discipline was not silence alone. It was choice. It was the refusal to let fear make the next move. Vance laughed at that, and his voice echoed through the chamber as he reached toward the dark pulse at the center. Shadows rose around his arm like black smoke, and for a moment it seemed he might seize the power he wanted. But the void did not reward control, it tested it. The dark surge struck back, throwing Vance hard against the stone wall, and the chamber shook with a deep crack. Arjuna saw the moment clearly then. Vance was dangerous, but he was also being used by a force that cared nothing for him. The villain had come believing he was the master, yet he was only another door opening for the darkness. The chamber changed after that hit. The broken ring in the center lifted a little from the floor, and a shape formed inside it, not a full body, but a face made of shifting shadow and fractured light. It was the first clear sign of the void itself, and it did not speak with a mouth. It spoke by pressing into the mind, promising power, whispering that all pain could end if one only gave up control. Arjuna felt that pressure at once, and for a brief instant, he saw his own fear for Ash Hollow, for the priest, and for the people above them. He also saw how easy it would be to strike in anger and let that anger become a crack in his own spirit. That was the danger the priest had described, and now it was real in every breath. Krishna stepped closer to Arjuna and told him that the void could be resisted only by a clear heart and a steady hand. Then Krishna revealed another truth, one that made the chamber feel even heavier. The iron oath blade had once belonged to a guardian who failed, not because the guardian was weak, but because pride entered the heart at the final moment. The weapon had been hidden away after that, waiting for someone who could do what the first guardian could not. Arjuna understood then that the blade was not a prize, it was a test. He tightened his grip, lowered his shoulders, and let his mind settle. The glow of the blade grew stronger, and the shadow face in the ring recoiled as if it had touched fire. Vance, bruised and furious, pushed himself up from the wall, and the darkness around him began to twist in harsher shapes. He did not give up, because he could not stand the thought of losing to Arjuna in front of the priest and the guide. He shouted that rules were made by the weak, and that power should belong to the person strong enough to seize it. Then he lunged toward the center ring one more time, hoping to force the seal fully open before Arjuna could finish the awakening. The chamber answered with a violent tremor. Stones slid across the floor, and a low crack split the far wall, opening a second dark gap that breathed cold air into the room. The void was spreading. Not fully, not yet, but enough to show that this chamber was only the first lock in a much larger prison. Krishna shouted for Arjuna to trust the blade, not himself, and that lesson changed everything. Arjuna stopped trying to outmuscle the darkness. He began to move with it instead, stepping in measured lines, guiding the blade through the old markings as if he were drawing a map in the air. The silver-blue light spilled across the floor, climbed the walls, and sealed one crack after another. Vance tried to counter it, but every shadow he threw was pushed back by the blade and by Arjuna's steady focus. The struggle was fierce, loud, and close, yet it was not the end. The center ring still shuddered, the shadow face still watched, and the priest of the shrine, with a trembling voice, warned them that they had reached only the first layer of the truth. Somewhere deeper below Ash Hollow, another seal was waking. Arjuna looked into the dark opening in the wall, then back at the trembling ring, and he knew the night was far from over. He had won no final victory yet, but he had found the path of discipline, and that path now led even deeper into the void. Ash Hollow lay under a hard black sky, and the cold wind moved through its pine trees like a warning. The old stone shrine above the town still held a deep silence, but that silence now felt broken, as if something below the earth had opened one eye. In the inner chamber beneath the shrine, the center ring still shuddered with a low and steady tremble, and the dark opening in the wall waited like a mouth that had just begun to breathe. Arjuna stood in front of it with a calm face, but his sharp eyes never stopped moving. He was a man of discipline, a warrior with long black hair, a lean build, and royal armor in deep blue, gold, and white, and he knew that the night had not ended at all. It had only changed shape. Beside him stood Krishna, a wise man with dark hair, kind, bright eyes, and yellow and blue robes that carried a calm strength. He was not there to fight for glory. He was there because Arjuna needed a guide who could see deeper than fear. At the edge of the chamber stood the priest of the shrine, an elderly man with white hair and thin shoulders, wrapped in pale robes marked by old sacred signs. He had guarded these vows for a long time, and now his trembling voice carried the weight of hard truth. He said the first layer of the truth had already broken, and another seal below Ash Hollow had begun to stir. That seal mattered because it held back the void, the vast dark rift that could spread through land, air, and memory. It was fully awakened. If it opened, the town, the shrine, and everything living above them could be overwhelmed by shadow. Arjuna understood that this was no longer only about one chamber or one weapon. It was about whether discipline could stand against endless darkness. Before Arjuna could answer, a hard scrape came from the dark passage behind them, and Vance stepped into the chamber with a cruel smile and dark hair falling over his sharp jaw. He wore black battle armor with crimson details and a heavy dark cloak, and he carried himself like a man who believed strength gave him the right to take whatever he wanted. Vance had followed the trail because he wanted the iron oath blade, the celestial weapon wrapped in iron bands that glowed with silver and blue light when awakened. He did not want it for protection. He wanted it because he believed the blade could force open the deeper seal and give him control over the power below. The reason mattered, because Vance had already learned that the void answered only to clear intent and strong will, and he had decided that if he could not control that power through honor, he would try to seize it through fear. His plan was dangerous because the shrine seals were not simple locks. They were living vows tied to discipline, and any careless force could crack them wider instead of closing them. Arjuna turned at once, bow still across his back, and his calm gaze met Vance with no panic. The two men had now reached the true shape of their conflict. Vance wanted power without restraint. Arjuna wanted strength that could protect others. Krishna watched them both and said quietly that the blade would not answer pride, because the sacred weapon only awakened for a heart that could hold still under pressure. The iron oath blade resting in Arjuna's grasp gave a faint silver pulse as if it heard every word. Vance laughed, but the sound was thin because the chamber itself had started to react. The center ring tilted harder and black dust drifted from the sacred markings along the walls. The priest pressed one hand to the stone as if he could feel the old vow cracking under the weight of the seal below. He then revealed something that changed the whole night. Long ago, the shrine had not been built only to trap the void. It had also been built to hide a second purpose. The deepest seal was not just a prison, it was a test. Whoever reached it had to prove they could carry a burden without letting fear, anger, or hunger twist it. That was why the guardians had left the iron oath blade near the first chamber. It was a measure of discipline, not a prize for the strongest hand. Arjuna felt the truth strike him like cold rain. He had thought the blade was a weapon to win a battle. Now he understood it was a mirror that showed the state of the soul. Krishna nodded and told him that this was why discipline mattered more than force. If Arjuna rushed, he would feed the very thing he wanted to stop. If he stayed calm, he could become the kind of guardian the shrine had been waiting for. Then the dark opening in the wall widened by a few inches, and a soft voice rolled out of it, low and broken, like a shadow speaking through stone. It was not a full form yet, it was only a presence, but it knew their names. It called to Vance first, offering power, revenge, and easy victory. Vance took one step forward before he caught himself, and that pause mattered. For the first time, his hunger had met a wall inside his own chest. Arjuna saw it, and he saw something else too. The shadow was not only baiting Vance, it was testing everyone in the chamber, trying to find the weakest heart and pull the whole place apart from within. The priest shouted for them to hold the line, and the chamber answered with a sudden surge of cold air. The walls shook, the ring spun halfway, and the seal below them pushed back through the stone like a giant hand. Arjuna planted his feet, breathed once, and lifted the iron oath blade with both hands. He did not swing it, he held it still. That simple choice changed everything. Silver and blue light ran along the iron bands, then spread into a clean, steady glow that cut through the dark dust. The blade was not asking for rage, it was asking for balance. Vance lunged anyway, reaching for the weapon with a reckless burst of force, but the chamber pressure struck his cloak and threw him back a few steps. He slammed into the wall, hissed through his teeth, and stared in shock as the blade refused him. He did not stop trying. He raised one hand and drove a wave of dark force toward Arjuna, hoping to break his focus. But Arjuna stayed centered, and Krishna spoke one quiet word that steadied him like a hand on the shoulder. Arjuna moved then, not with wild speed, but with clear purpose. He stepped through the shadow wave, turned his body, and drove the glowing blade into the stone line beneath the ring. The floor cracked open with a deep groan, and a hidden stairway appeared below, leading down into a colder and deeper level. The stairway had been hidden under the chamber all along. That was the revelation the priest had feared most. The first seal was only the visible one. The true prison lay below, and now it was awake enough to show its path. The priest looked down the stairs with fear in his white eyes and said that no one had entered that route in many years. He also said with a trembling voice that something had been waiting there for a chosen bearer, not a conqueror. Arjuna understood at once that the shrine had not only protected the void. It had also waited for someone strong enough to face it without becoming part of it. Arjuna took one slow step toward the stairs, and the chamber behind him began to fade into darkness and dust. The iron oath blade remained bright in his hands, but its light now felt quieter, more focused, and more honest. Vance, still against the wall, lifted his head with anger and disbelief, and the priest lowered his gaze because he could no longer pretend this was a simple warning. The truth had become a path, and that path was going down. Krishna moved beside Arjuna and spoke with calm certainty, saying that courage without discipline would fail, but discipline without compassion would also fail. Arjuna listened, and he realized that his strength could not be only for himself. He had to protect the town above, the shrine below, and even the people who stood against him, because the void could turn any wound into a doorway. That thought changed him. He was still serious and focused, but now his calm held a deeper purpose. He was no longer chasing a victory. He was accepting a vow. Then a final tremor rolled through the chamber, and from deep beneath the new stairway came a slow pulse, like a giant heart waking in the dark. The priest whispered that the second seal had heard them. Arjuna tightened his grip, looked once at Krishna, once at the priest, and once at Vance, and then he began to descend. Above him, the center ring kept shuddering. Behind him, the shadow face in the dark opening kept watching. Below him, the next layer of the void was waiting. The night was still far from over, and the story had only opened its deepest door. The stairway dropped into colder air, and the stone around it seemed to listen. Below the shrine, the hidden world of Ash Hollow felt older than the town above, older than the road, older than the men who had built their lives on the hill. The walls were cut from rough rock, and thin lines of sacred markings ran across them like warnings that had never grown tired. Every step Arjuna took made the low pulse stronger, and the sound was no longer distant. It was close, deep, and steady, like something huge had opened one eye in the dark. Arjuna was a lean warrior with long black hair, sharp focused eyes, and royal armor in deep blue, gold, and white. He wanted the truth, but more than that, he wanted to keep the seals intact before the void could spill farther into the shrine and then into the town. Behind him came Krishna, a calm guide with dark hair, kind bright eyes, and yellow and blue robes that moved softly in the cold air. He wanted Arjuna to stay steady because he knew the real battle would be won through control, not panic. The priest followed with thin shoulders, white hair, and plain pale robes covered in sacred marks. He mattered because he had served this place his whole life, and he knew the chamber below had not been meant for easy answers. Farther back, Vance moved like a blade in the dark, a villainous man with dark hair, a hard stare, and black armor with crimson details. He wanted the power hidden below because he believed the seals were not a prison but a lock on a treasure that should belong to him. That belief made him dangerous, and everyone on the stairway knew it. They were not only walking into a chamber, they were walking into a choice that could break the shrine open forever. The stairway ended at a narrow arch, and the arch opened into the inner chamber. The room was wide, round, and carved from old stone that looked worn smooth by centuries of silent pressure. Sacred lines spread across the floor in rings and circles, and each line was filled with dust so old it looked almost like ash. In the center stood a slab of dark stone, and above it hovered the second seal, a pale shape that flickered like frozen lightning inside a glass shell. The slow pulse came from beneath that slab, and each beat made the markings on the floor glow for a moment, then fade again. Arjuna stopped at the edge of the circle, and Krishna raised one hand without speaking, telling him to wait. The priest looked at the ceiling, then at the walls, and his face tightened with fear that he could no longer hide. He explained in a low voice that the first seal had only kept the lower path shut, but the second seal guarded the chamber of binding, where the deepest pressure of the void had been chained long ago. If this seal broke, the chamber would not merely open. It would call the void deeper into the shrine and awaken every hidden layer tied to it. That was why the stake was so high. Ash Hollow sat on a fault line of old sacred land, and if the chamber failed, the town above would begin to feel the dark pull in dreams, in fear, and in waking hours. Vance smiled at that because fear to him was only another opening. He said that the priest was clinging to old stories, that the shrine was weak, and that a bold hand could seize the power before the seal collapsed on its own. Krishna answered him with quiet certainty, saying that greed never mastered a sacred force. It only invited ruin. Vance turned his gaze toward the slab in the center, and Arjuna saw something there that made him uneasy. The iron bands on the iron oath blade, still strapped across Arjuna's back, had begun to shimmer with silver and blue light. The weapon was not reacting to fear, it was reacting to the chamber itself. The old priest noticed it too, and his voice dropped into a stunned whisper. The blade was not just a weapon. It was a key built to answer discipline, because only a steady heart could awaken what the seals had hidden. That was the first clear twist in the chamber, and it changed everything. Arjuna had carried the blade as if it were a tool for battle, but now the priest said it had been made to test the one who would guard the seals, not break them. Before anyone could speak again, the floor gave a deep tremor, and a line across the far wall cracked open with a dry stone sound. Cold air rushed through the chamber, and from the crack came a shadow that was not quite a shadow. It stretched upward like smoke, then formed a flat face with no clear mouth, only empty dark places where eyes should have been. It was the Watcher from above, now pressed into the chamber as if the void had given it a body for a moment. The priest stepped back, and even Vance paused, because the thing had no human shape and no human concern. It wanted only one thing, and that was to widen the opening between worlds. The second seal shivered, and the pulse below the slab turned faster. Krishna moved beside Arjuna and spoke in a calm, steady voice. He said the chamber would answer the strongest feeling in the room, and if fear ruled them, the void would feed on it. If anger ruled them, the seal would crack faster. But if discipline ruled them, the chamber might still hold. Arjuna closed his eyes for a single breath, and in that small silence he remembered the burden he had accepted above. The people in Ash Hollow who never knew their safety rested on a hidden room beneath their feet, and the look in the priest's face when he had first spoken of the seals. Arjuna wanted to rush forward and strike the Watcher apart, but he knew that force alone would not solve this. So he lowered his stance, drew the iron oath blade free, and held it with both hands in front of him without swinging. The blade answered with a brighter silver glow, and the iron bands loosened with a soft ringing sound. The chamber went still for one impossible moment, as if the stone itself was waiting to see whether he would hold control. Then Vance made his move. He stepped toward the center slab, his cloak trailing behind him, and he said that if the blade had chosen Arjuna, then Arjuna should use it to claim the chamber before the priest could bury it again. He wanted the power of the second seal because he believed the deeper layer of the void could be bent into a weapon. That motive finally stood clear, and it was as ugly as it was simple. Vance did not fear the dark, he wanted to command it. He reached for the slab, and the Watcher in the wall twisted toward him at once, as if his greed had called to it personally. Arjuna moved before anyone else could stop him. He stepped between Vance and the slab, and the two men faced each other under the dim light of the chamber. Vance had the hard look of a man who had long ago chosen power over peace, while Arjuna carried the quiet strain of someone who knew that strength without restraint could harm everything he loved. The priest cried out that no one must touch the center stone because it was bound to the second seal by sacred vows. Krishna added that the vow was not about magic alone, it was about trust. The one who entered the chamber had to place the good of others above the wish to win. That was why the chamber had waited so long, and why every seal had survived until now. Vance laughed, but the sound was tense and sharp, and he reached again for the slab with open hand and hungry eyes. The shadow face in the wall lunged out in a ripple of darkness, not to strike him, but to feed on the disorder he created. The room shook harder, and the glowing lines on the floor began to flash in broken patterns. Arjuna raised the iron oath blade, and the silver-blue light shot across the markings like a thread being pulled tight. The blade did not roar or explode, it simply answered his steady hand. He planted his feet, breathed once, and held the weapon in place while Krishna guided him with short, clear words. The priest joined in with a sacred chant, his white hair trembling as he spoke the old vow that had held the chamber together for generations. The seal above the stone began to spin slowly, then lower itself toward the slab. Vance tried to shove past Arjuna one last time, but the force in the chamber pushed him back, and he stumbled into the outer ring, forced to retreat as the shadow face recoiled from the blade's light. The second seal settled into place with a deep hum, but it did not close completely. Instead, it opened a narrow line of light in the stone floor, just wide enough to show a deeper stairway spiraling down into blackness. The priest stared at it in horror, then in understanding, and he said the chamber had not been guarding a prison alone. It had been guarding a passage. Someone had built the seals not only to keep the void out, but to keep one final truth hidden below it. That truth hit Arjuna harder than any blow because he finally understood why the blade had awakened now. The iron oath blade was not made to destroy the void. It was made to lead a worthy guardian through it, one layer at a time, without losing himself. The weapon had been waiting for discipline because the path below could not be forced open by pride. It had to be entered with purpose. Arjuna looked at Krishna, then at the priest, and finally at Vance, who had gone still with anger and shock. For the first time, Arjuna saw the full shape of the night. The void was not only a threat outside the shrine, it was a test that reached into every choice they made. If he let anger rule him, he would become part of the problem. If he let Vance seize the path below, the chamber would be used for greed, and the seals would fail faster than anyone could repair them. So Arjuna lowered the blade and chose patience. He told the others that they would go down together, but only if every step was guided by trust and not by force. Krishna nodded at once because he had been waiting for that answer. The priest closed his eyes with relief because he knew the chamber had found the right heart, even if the danger was far from over. Vance said nothing, but his gaze stayed on the opening in the floor, and his silence made him more dangerous than any argument. Beneath them, the new stairway waited in black stillness, and the pulse from below had changed. It no longer sounded like a sleeping heart. It sounded like something awake and listening. Arjuna stood at the edge of the opening, the glow of the iron oath blade reflecting in his sharp eyes, and he knew the next descent would reveal either the answer they needed or a darkness deeper than anyone had named. He took one slow breath, steady and calm, then placed one foot toward the stairs as the chamber held its breath around him, and the story moved one level deeper into the void. The stone stairs dropped steeply into cold darkness, and the air below the shrine felt old enough to remember fear. Ash Hollow had been quiet on the surface, with its dark pine trees, narrow roads, and tired houses, but everyone near the hill shrine knew the truth now. Something deep under the ground had begun to wake, and the sound of it had changed from a sleeping pulse into a listening presence. That change mattered because a sleeping danger could wait, but an awake danger could choose, and if the void chose to rise, the whole town could be swept into silence and shadow. Arjuna led the descent with his long black hair tied back and his royal blue armor catching the faint light, while Krishna followed with calm dark hair, bright eyes, and yellow and blue robes that seemed strange and steady in the dark. The elderly priest, a thin old man with white hair and pale robes marked with sacred signs, walked beside them with careful steps, because he knew the shrine better than anyone and feared what his order had failed to understand. Behind them, the iron bands of the iron oath blade gave off a thin silver glow, and the weapon felt less like a sword now and more like a strict judge that was waiting for the right hand. Arjuna did not speak at first because he could feel the chamber below pressing against his mind, and he knew this was not only a fight for a town, but a fight for the meaning of discipline, trust, and the right to hold power. At the bottom of the stairs, the group reached the inner chamber, a hidden stone room lined with old markings, broken seal lines, and walls that seemed to drink in the light. The place was not grand, but it was built with purpose, and that purpose was clear even before anyone spoke. It had been made to hold the void back, not by force alone, but by a vow that had to be kept with complete control. The priest lifted a shaking hand and pointed toward the center of the floor, where a round stone ring sat under a web of silver cracks. He explained, in a low and careful voice, that the shrine order had protected this place for many years because the void had once tried to spread through the land by feeding on fear, pride, and broken promises. He said the iron oath blade had been placed above the chamber for one reason only, because the blade would respond to a person who could act without greed. Arjuna listened with sharp eyes, and Krishna watched him with quiet confidence, because both men understood that the true test was not the depth of the chamber, but the state of the heart. Then the blade brightened and the silver light turned blue, and the marks in the floor answered with a soft hum that made the stones seem alive. That was when the first twist of the night became clear. The priest was not only a guardian of the shrine, he was also the last keeper of a failed oath, and he had brought Arjuna here because the old order had once hidden the truth from everyone else, fearing that honest people would be too afraid to face it. Arjuna stepped forward, and the moment his boot touched the ring, the whole chamber changed. The walls trembled, the cracks in the floor widened into glowing lines, and the dark at the far end of the room began to move like a curtain in the wind. Then Vance emerged from that darkness, and his presence hit the room like a hard blow. He was a man with dark hair, a sharp jaw, and a hard stare, dressed in black battle armor with crimson details and a heavy cloak that dragged behind him like a warning. He had followed them through hidden paths beneath the shrine, and now his reason for coming stood clear in the cold light. He did not fear the void, he wanted it. Vance believed the world was ruled by weak hands and old rules, and he had decided that if he could seize the force below the shrine, he could bend towns, leaders, and armies to his will. He spoke with cruel calm, saying that the void was not a curse if a strong person held it first. His words made sense in the worst way, because they came from pride that had spent years growing into hunger. He did not want to destroy the world for no reason. He wanted to dominate it, and that made him even more dangerous. Arjuna lifted the iron oath blade, but the weapon did not strike at once. Instead, it pulsed once, as if asking whether he was ready to carry its burden without losing himself. Krishna took one step to the side, watching both men, and the priest whispered that the chamber would test any force placed inside it. That was when the floor ring opened, and a dark stream rose from below, not as fire or smoke, but as shifting black light that twisted toward Vance first. Vance reached for that power with a cruel smile, but the chamber punished his impatience. The void surged toward him, then recoiled, then split into thin moving strands that wrapped around the stone floor like searching fingers. The room shook harder, and the old markings flashed, warning that the seal was failing from both sides at once. Arjuna understood then that the danger was bigger than a simple battle. If Vance forced the void open too quickly, the chamber seal would collapse and the rift would spread out through the shrine and into Ash Hollow above. The town would not be safe, and every person there would be trapped under a force that did not care about walls or prayers. Krishna raised his voice calm but firm and told Arjuna that the blade needed discipline, not anger. He reminded him that the weapon answered only when the heart stayed clear. Arjuna breathed in, remembering every step that had brought him here, every fear he had set aside, and every choice that had taught him to stand steady instead of striking wild. He lowered the blade, then guided its glow toward the stone ring instead of Vance. The change was small at first, but the chamber noticed. The silver and blue light spread across the floor markings, and the black strands of the void paused, as if confused by a will that did not try to dominate it. Vance snarled and attacked, driving forward with brute force, and the clash that followed sent sparks of light and shadow across the room. No one fell, but both sides were pushed hard, and the chamber groaned under the strain. Then the second revelation arrived, and it cut deeper than Vance or the darkness. The priest confessed that the ancient seal did not only hold the void in place, it also fed it, because the shrine order had used fear itself as part of the lock. Every time the guardians taught people to be afraid of the chamber, the seal gained strength, but the void learned from that fear and grew smarter. That was why it had started to sound awake. It had been listening to everyone for years, learning from dread, anger, and desperate hope. The priest had kept this secret because he thought the truth would break the town, but hiding it had only made the danger worse. Krishna closed his eyes for a moment, then told the others that a prison built on fear always becomes a lesson for the thing inside it. Arjuna looked at the glowing floor and finally understood what the blade had been asking of him since the beginning. The iron oath blade was not meant to crush the void through force. It was meant to impose a clean and steady vow, one that the darkness could not imitate. So Arjuna took a half step back, planted both feet, and lifted the sword with open hands instead of a tense grip. He spoke a simple oath, promising to protect the town, the shrine, and even the truth, no matter how painful it was. The blade answered at once. Its silver glow deepened, the blue light spread in a wide circle, and the chamber quieted for one brief heartbeat. Vance felt the change and rushed in with a furious strike, but the blade met him with a wall of light that forced him back several steps. He did not fall, but his cloak whipped around him, and for the first time his face showed real surprise. The chamber did not end the conflict. It only revealed how close everyone stood to disaster. The void still writhed beneath the floor ring, and now thin dark cracks were crawling toward the stairs that led back to Ash Hollow. Arjuna held the blade steady, his sharp eyes fixed on the seal, while Krishna moved beside the priest and ordered him to speak every line of the old vow he could remember. The priest, ashamed but determined, began to recite the words, and each one caused the markings in the stone to glow a little brighter. Vance, however, did not retreat from his goal. He backed toward the open dark at the far side of the room, one hand raised as if he had already decided on another path. He said he would return with more force, more men, and a way to command the void even if the shrine itself had to collapse around him. His motive remained simple and terrible because he wanted power more than peace, and he believed the world would belong to whoever could take it first. Arjuna watched him go and realized that this was not the end of Vance, only the start of a far larger conflict. The villain had learned enough to become more dangerous, and the shrine had revealed enough truth to make the next step impossible to avoid. Still, the chamber had not broken yet. The seal held, weak but alive, and the living dark below it kept listening. Arjuna lowered his sword only after the floor stopped shaking, and he felt something change inside himself. He was no longer chasing answers like a warrior chasing a target. He had become a guardian, and that meant accepting fear without giving it control. Above them, Ash Hollow still waited in the cold night, unaware that the next descent would not be into stone alone, but into a deeper battle for trust, truth, and the right to stop the void before it learned how to rise. The hidden chamber stayed still after the shaking ended, but its silence felt heavy and alive. Cold stone walls pressed in from every side, and the old sacred markings along the floor gave off a faint silver glow. Arjuna stood at the center of that glow with his long black hair falling over one shoulder, his blue, gold, and white armor dimmed by dust and shadow, and his calm face now carrying the quiet weight of a guardian. Krishna stood near the wall in his yellow and blue robes, his dark hair neat, his bright eyes gentle but sharp, while the elderly priest watched them both with his thin shoulders held straight and his white hair shining in the low light. Above them, Ash Hollow remained a sleeping town under the cold night, but everyone in the chamber knew that sleep would not last if the void kept growing. The danger was simple to understand now, and that made it worse. If the seals failed, the void would spread beyond stone, beyond the shrine, and into the town where families still believed the dark hill above them was only an old place of prayer. The priest of the shrine stepped closer to Arjuna, and his solemn face looked older than before. He was a man who had spent his whole life guarding a promise that he did not make, but that he had sworn to protect. He told them the shrine was built long ago by people who had once faced the void and learned one hard truth, which was that the dark rift did not simply attack land. It fed on fear, anger, and broken trust. That was why the shrine had sacred markings, why the inner chamber existed, and why the iron oath blade had been sealed here beneath iron bands. The blade was never meant to be a trophy. It was made to answer only to perfect discipline, because anyone with selfish desire would awaken the wrong kind of power. Krishna listened in silence, and Arjuna felt the meaning settle deep inside him. He had not changed because he had become stronger. He had changed because he had finally understood that strength without trust could not protect anyone. That truth mattered because Vance was coming for the blade, and Vance did not want peace. He wanted control. The answer arrived before anyone heard footsteps. A hard voice rolled through the chamber entrance, cold and amused, and Vance stepped into view with his dark hair falling around a sharp jaw and a hard stare that never looked tired. His black battle armor with crimson details caught the silver light, and his heavy cloak dragged behind him like a shadow that had chosen a human shape. Behind him came two armored followers, men with tense faces and lowered eyes, not because they were evil, but because they were afraid of the man leading them. Vance wanted the Iron Oath blade because he believed the shrine had hidden the final key to opening the void fully. He had studied the old signs, but he had studied them in the wrong way. He saw power where the priest saw warning. He saw a weapon where Arjuna saw duty. Vance spoke with clear confidence when he said the world was already weak, already divided, already full of fear, and that a force like the void could be directed if a strong hand controlled it first. It was a twisted idea, but it made sense in his mind. He believed order could be forced, and he believed anyone who stood in his way was only delaying a future that would belong to him. Arjuna moved in front of Krishna and the priest without thinking, and that small motion showed how fully he had stepped into his new role. Before, he might have rushed Vance with fury and demanded the truth. Now he stayed balanced, calm, and ready, because guardians do not waste their strength. Vance laughed at that calmness and looked past him toward the sealed pedestal in the far side of the chamber. The Iron Oath blade rested there like a sleeping star trapped in iron bands, its silver and blue light pulsing in slow rhythm. The priest warned that the blade could not be taken by force, and that any person who tried would awaken a backlash from the seal. Vance answered by raising one hand, and the two followers behind him spread out with nervous steps. They were not there to win a noble battle. They were there to create enough confusion for Vance to reach the weapon. Krishna then spoke softly, and his voice carried through the chamber with a calm power that made even Vance pause. Krishna said that the void could not be ruled, because anything built on fear only grows larger when fed more fear. That was the first crack in Vance, though he hid it fast. He hated being questioned by someone who did not shout, because Krishna spoke like a man who had already seen the end of Vance's path. The fight that followed was fast, tense, and strangely quiet between the sharp moments. One follower rushed toward the pedestal, but Arjuna moved like a blue and gold blur, blocking the path and forcing the man backward without striking a cruel blow. Another follower tried to circle around the priest, and the old man lifted his hands to the sacred markings on the floor. The symbols brightened, and a wall of pale light rose just enough to stop the advance. Vance saw that the chamber itself was fighting for them, and that realization made him angrier. He drew closer to the blade, and the void answered his greed with a low ripple through the chamber stones. The dark edges of that unseen rift seemed to breathe behind him, as if the chamber were briefly showing a memory of the enemy waiting above and below all things. Arjuna noticed something important in that moment. The void did not only hunger for chaos, it also used broken people as doors. Vance was not just chasing power, he was being guided by the part of himself that wanted to prove he was never weak. That was why his attack became more desperate with every step. He was fighting the shame inside himself as much as the people in the room. Then the priest revealed the twist that changed the shape of the whole descent. He turned to Arjuna and Krishna and said the chamber had not been built only to hide the blade from enemies. It had been built to hide it from its first guardian. Long ago, the original bearer of the iron oath blade had once been tempted by the void and had nearly opened the seal out of fear that the world could not survive without absolute control. That guardian had been stopped by the priest ancestors and had chosen exile over disaster, leaving behind the blade and the rules that protected it. Vance froze when he heard that because it exposed the truth he had not wanted to face. The shrine was not hiding a shortcut to power. It was protecting the world from the same mistake made long ago. Krishna looked at Arjuna and said this was why fear mattered. Fear was not the enemy by itself. Fear became the enemy when a person obeyed it more than truth. Arjuna felt those words settle into him like a vow. He was no longer only fighting Vance. He was fighting the same trap that had twisted minds before him, and if he lost control now, he would become part of the same old ruin. Vance still tried to force the issue. He shouted for his followers to rush the seal, and one of them slammed into the glowing boundary with enough force to send a burst of white light across the chamber. The shock did not injure anyone, but it pushed everyone back and made the room tremble again. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The iron oath blade began to hum and its bands flickered with silver fire. The priest stumbled, then caught himself on the wall, his face pale but steady. Krishna moved to help him, placing one hand near the sacred markings and the other near his chest as if listening for the next beat of the chamber. Arjuna drew his bow from his back and aimed not to harm, but to pin Vance in place and keep him away from the pedestal. His arrow struck the stone just beside Vance, close enough to stop him, and the villain flinched for the first time. For a brief instant, his hard stare turned uncertain. That tiny crack showed the man underneath the armor, a man terrified that if he did not win now, he would be left meaningless. Arjuna saw that fear, and instead of mocking it, he understood it. That understanding made him stronger because a guardian does not need to hate an enemy to stop him. The chamber then opened another secret. A section of the wall beside the pedestal slid inward with a deep stone grind, revealing a narrow passage lined with the same sacred markings. The priest looked shocked, then ashamed, and finally relieved, as if he had feared this path would never be found. He said the passage led to a lower seal, one even older than the chamber they stood in. There, the final binding of the void had once been anchored, and there, the true reason for the shrine would be revealed. But the passage could not be opened fully while the blade remained unstable, and the blade could not be stabilized unless someone touched it with perfect discipline. Everyone looked at Arjuna at the same time because the answer was now clear. The warrior who had once chased answers like prey had become the only one who could steady the weapon. He stepped toward the pedestal while Vance shouted in protest and the chamber pulsed with warning. Arjuna placed both hands near the iron oath blade and the silver blue light climbed over his armor like cold fire. It did not reject him, it listened. For one breath, everything in the chamber became still. Arjuna felt the blade testing him, asking whether he wanted victory or duty, pride or protection. He thought of Ash Hollow above the hill, of the people sleeping in homes that still had no idea how close the dark had come, and of Krishna standing beside him with patient faith. He thought of the priest who had carried a burden for so long that it had bent his body but not his spirit. Then Arjuna answered the blade without words. He let go of the need to prove himself. He let go of fear. He let go of anger. The iron oath blade responded at once, and its light flared bright enough to cast long shadows across the chamber walls. Vance shielded his eyes and stepped back, stunned that the power had chosen discipline instead of force. But the moment did not end in triumph yet. From deep below the newly opened passage came a far darker sound, a slow and endless stirring, like something vast shifting in sleep. The priest went rigid and Krishna looked down into the passage with grave calm. Whatever waited below was not simply hidden. It had been watching all of them for a long time. Arjuna tightened his grip on the awakened blade, and for the first time he understood that the next descent would not be about finding truth alone. It would be about facing the thing that had been listening all along, and this time the chamber would not be enough to keep it back. The shrine beneath Ash Hollow felt colder than the night above, and that cold was not natural. It clung to the stone walls, slipped through the narrow passage, and pressed against the chest like a warning that had no words. Far below the pine trees and the quiet hill, the old inner chamber waited with its ancient markings, its sealed floor, and its heavy silence. Arjuna stood at the edge of the opening, tall and steady, his long black hair falling over the gold and blue of his royal armor. His sharp eyes stayed on the darkness below because he knew the truth now. Something in that depth had heard them. Something in that depth had been waiting for them. Beside him, Krishna stood in his yellow and blue robes, calm as a still lake, with dark hair and kind, bright eyes that never lost their focus. He did not look afraid, but he did look grave, because he understood the same hard fact. The void was not just a shape of darkness. It was a hungry force, and if it rose fully, it would swallow the shrine, the town, and every promise tied to the old seal. The priest of the shrine, an elderly man with white hair and thin shoulders, stood with his plain pale robes brushing the stone. His solemn face had gone hard with dread because he had spent his life guarding this place, and now he saw how close that duty had come to failure. Vance stood a few steps back in black battle armor with crimson details and a heavy dark cloak, his dark hair falling around a sharp jaw and a hard stare. He wanted the power below for himself, not because he loved the shrine, but because he believed power belonged to the one bold enough to seize it. That greed had guided him here, and it was about to cost everyone dearly. Arjuna tightened his grip on the iron oath blade, the celestial weapon wrapped in iron bands and lit with silver and blue fire. It had awakened only after discipline, patience, and a true heart had tested it. Now it hummed in his hands as if it recognized the danger below and urged him forward. Krishna glanced once at the priest, then at Arjuna, and spoke in a low voice that stayed calm even in danger. He said the chamber was not only a seal, but also a listening gate. Long ago, the keepers had learned that the void did not always attack at once. Sometimes it watched, learned, and pushed against fear until fear itself opened the door. That was why the shrine had rules. That was why the blade demanded discipline. That was why the priest had hidden so much for so long. The old man then confessed the first hard truth of the night. He had not only guarded the seal, he had also hidden a second key because the first keepers feared that greed would one day come in human form. They feared a man like Vance more than the darkness itself because the void could be resisted, but ambition could invite it in. Vance laughed at that, a short, cruel sound that echoed through the passage. He said fear had made the old man weak, and weakness had almost buried a great weapon forever. He stepped forward, reaching for the lower stair, and the shrine answered with a deep shiver. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The old markings along the wall glowed once, then dimmed. The void below stirred again, and the listening became a slow, heavy pulse. Arjuna moved in front of the priest without thinking, and that choice mattered. In the past, he had moved like a fighter seeking victory. Now he moved like a protector. Krishna noticed it at once because he had been guiding Arjuna not only in battle, but in spirit. He gave a small nod as if to say the warrior had finally understood the first duty of strength. Then the three of them descended, while Vance followed close behind, unable to resist the pull of what he thought would make him greater than everyone else. The stairway bent down into a wider underground hall, and the air changed there. It felt thinner, colder, and sharp with old power. Stone pillars lined the walls, each one carved with sacred marks that had once formed a chain of seals. Many of those marks were cracked now, and some had been burned black by the pressure of the void. In the middle of the hall stood a wide circular floor, split by a hairline crack that pulsed with faint black light. That crack was new. It was the source of the sound they had heard above. It was also the reason the shrine was trembling. Krishna crouched near the floor and studied the marks with steady eyes. He told Arjuna and the priest that the seal had not failed all at once. It had been weakened over time, each time someone used anger, pride, or fear near it. The void fed on those feelings, not because it loved them, but because they made people careless. It pressed against the mind until the mind opened itself. The priest closed his eyes and admitted another truth. Years ago, he had sensed a stranger near the shrine, a man with restless hunger and a mind full of selfish plans. He had sensed Vance. He had hoped the shrine walls would turn him away. Instead, Vance had returned again and again, drawn by a rumor that the iron oath blade rested somewhere beneath the hill. He believed the blade could command the seal, and he believed the void could be bent into a weapon. That was the real reason he had pushed so hard to come here now. He was not only seeking treasure. He wanted control over a force that frightened him because he thought control would prove he was stronger than fear. Vance stepped into the center of the chamber and raised one hand, and the shadows around his boots thickened at once. He was not a master of the void, but he had learned enough from stolen rights and broken warnings to meddle with it. A black ripple climbed the cracked floor. The circular seal flared, then spasmed. Arjuna moved instantly, drawing the awakened blade in a clean line of silver and blue light. The weapon sang once, bright and sharp, and the glow pushed back the creeping dark around Vance. The priest shouted for restraint because he knew a wild strike could crack the seal faster. Krishna lifted one hand and told Arjuna to breathe, to settle, to fight with purpose instead of fury. Arjuna obeyed, and that choice made the difference. He planted his feet, narrowed his focus, and sent the blade down in a controlled arc that cut through the shadow line without touching the sacred stone. The dark ripples snapped apart and recoiled, but it did not vanish. It pulled back into the crack where something below shifted again, bigger this time and far more aware. The chamber lights flickered. The stone underfoot groaned. Then the twist came, sudden and clear. The priest looked at the old markings, then at Vance, and he said the stranger had not only come to steal power. Vance had been followed. He had brought something into the shrine with him, a fragment of the void sealed in a charm hidden under his armor. That charm was not a tool, it was a tether. Each time Vance reached for dark power, he was feeding the very force he thought he controlled. Vance froze for one sharp moment, and for the first time his hard face showed real fear. He had believed he was handling a weapon. Instead, he had become a door. The black charm cracked open on his chest, and a wave of shadow rushed into the chamber. The iron oath blade blazed brighter, but even its holy light strained against the surge. Arjuna was forced back a step, then another, as the wave slammed into him and rattled every bone in his body. Krishna moved beside him, calm in the storm, and spoke a simple truth. He said fear had made Vance easy to use. The void never needed loyalty. It only needed a person willing to open the gate. Those words struck Vance harder than any blade. He saw in one terrible instant that his hunger had not made him powerful. It had made him useful to something cruel and empty. The priest, shaking but steady, reached into his robe and pulled out the second key he had hidden for years. It was a plain object, small and worn, but the moment he held it up, the old markings on the walls answered with a thin ring of light. He said the key could not close the seal alone. It needed discipline from the blade, wisdom from the guide, faith from the keeper, and courage from the warrior. It needed all of them at once. Arjuna understood immediately. This was not a battle one person could win. It was a test of trust. He set his jaw, lifted the iron oath blade, and looked not at Vance but at Krishna and the priest. For the first time, he let others share the weight instead of carrying it alone. Krishna stepped to his side and began to guide the rhythm of breath and motion, while the priest moved to the broken ring of markings and fitted the key into a hidden notch in the stone. The chamber shook harder, and the crack in the floor widened just enough for a vast, dark shape to press upward from below. It had no full form yet, only a terrible presence and a sense of old hunger. Arjuna felt it watching him through the opening, testing his resolve, waiting for a mistake. Vance stumbled backward, trapped between his own failure and the force he had helped wake, and for one brief moment he was no longer arrogant. He was only small. Arjuna raised the blade, Krishna called for stillness, and the priest turned the key with both trembling hands. Light and shadow collided across the chamber in a single bright surge, and the seal began to answer. The crack did not close yet, but it did stop widening. The force below was driven back for now, though not defeated, and the whole shrine groaned as if it knew the battle was far from over. Arjuna stood in the fading light, breathing hard, changed by what he had learned. He was no longer chasing truth like a lone seeker. He was becoming a guardian who understood that strength without trust could not save anyone. Above them, Ash Hollow slept under the cold pines, unaware that the deepest danger had only just been checked, not ended. Below, in the dark beyond the seal, the thing that had been listening all along grew still again, and that stillness felt worse than the roar. Krishna looked into the crack, his face calm but deeply serious, and said the next step would reveal whether the shrine had been protecting a prison or a door. That question hung in the chamber like a new shadow, and no one there could yet answer it. The cold night stayed still over Ash Hollow, and the pines around the shrine bent in the wind like silent watchers. Deep under the hill, the inner chamber waited with its old stone walls, its worn sacred marks, and its heavy seal that no one there fully understood. Arjuna stood near the crack in the floor, tall and steady in his blue, gold, and white armor, with his long black hair tied back and his sharp eyes fixed on the dark below. Krishna stood beside him in yellow and blue robes, calm as ever, with dark hair and bright, kind eyes that held no fear at all. The elderly priest of the shrine, a thin old man with white hair and a solemn face, kept both hands near the carved stone, because he had guarded this place since he was young, and had spent his whole life fearing the wrong person might open it. The danger had been checked but not ended, and everyone in the room knew it. If the seal failed, the void could spread beyond the shrine and swallow the town, the hill, and every safe thing around them. That was why Krishna had spoken so plainly before. The shrine was either a prison or a door, and the answer would decide the fate of everyone above ground. The priest drew a slow breath and looked at Arjuna, then at Krishna, then back to the crack in the floor. He told them the old vow in simple words, because the old ways demanded simple truth. Long ago, his order had not built the shrine to worship the stone, but to keep the void from finding a way into the world of people. The seal had been made with discipline, prayer, and the iron oath blade, a sacred weapon wrapped in iron bands that responded only when the heart that held it could remain clear and controlled. The priest admitted that he had feared opening the chamber because he no longer knew which side of the seal held the greater danger. If it was a prison, then something terrible was trapped below. If it was a door, then the shrine had only delayed an invasion, and the waiting itself had been the only mercy. Arjuna listened closely, and his jaw tightened because he could already feel how much was at stake. Krishna did not interrupt. He only asked the next clear question. Who had first hidden the truth, and why had they never told the town? The priest lowered his eyes and said that the order had stayed silent to prevent fear, but also because a powerful outsider had once tried to force the seal open for personal gain. That outsider was Vance, and he had come to the shrine years ago with dark armor, a hard stare, and one fixed idea. He believed the void could be controlled, and he wanted to make it obey him. The priest had driven him back then, but he had never forgotten the hunger in that man's voice. At the far end of the chamber, the stone wall gave a low shiver, and the whole room seemed to tighten around the sound. Krishna stepped closer to the crack and knelt with quiet care, as if he were listening to the breath of a sleeping animal. He explained the rule of the void in plain words so everyone could understand. The void did not only push on stone, it also pressed on fear, doubt, and memory. If a person approached it with anger or greed, it would answer that feeling and grow stronger around it. If a person approached it with discipline and trust, it could be held back long enough to learn more. That was why the iron oath blade mattered. It was not just a weapon, it was a test. It would only shine if the person holding it was fully steady inside. Arjuna rested his hand near the hilt, feeling the ancient pressure inside the blade, and he knew Krishna was asking him to be more than brave. He had to be calm. He had to be precise. He had to accept that one wrong choice could wake the force beneath the shrine. The priest then revealed one more hard truth. The shrine had not only protected the town. It had also protected Vance from learning the truth too early, because if he had found the wrong way into the chamber alone, his greed might have torn open the seal. Now, however, his return was no longer a rumor. His tracks had been seen near the pine path, and his men had already been moving through the trees. The warning came just as the chamber lights dimmed. A cold pressure slid through the crack, and the shadows along the floor stretched toward the center of the room. Then Vance entered from the stairway below, wearing black battle armor with crimson details and a heavy dark cloak that made him look larger than he was. His dark hair fell over a sharp jaw, and his hard stare carried the same cruel confidence the priest remembered. He was not here by accident. He had followed the shrine below the hill because he had finally learned that the seal hid a power source, not just a relic. He wanted that power because he believed the world rewarded strength and punished hesitation. In his mind, the void was not a curse. It was a force waiting for a master. He spoke with smooth certainty and told Arjuna to step aside because the old men had wasted too many years with fear. He said the shrine had held power in silence, while stronger hands could have used it to rule every border, every town, and every army nearby. Arjuna answered him with a steady voice and said that power without restraint always breaks the hand that reaches for it. Vance smiled at that and said restraint was just another word for weakness. Then he lifted one hand, and the dark air behind him rippled as if something unseen was answering his call. The room did not explode into chaos, but the pressure rose fast and the chamber became even more dangerous. Vance had not come alone, and he had already prepared a way to force the seal open if the first attempt failed. Krishna moved first because he understood that delay would help Vance more than any blade would. He asked Arjuna to hold position and trust the rhythm of the chamber. Then he turned to the priest and asked for the oldest part of the vow. The priest, trembling but still faithful, took the iron oath blade from its resting place and placed it in Arjuna's hands. The weapon felt cold at first, then bright, then alive with silver and blue light as Arjuna breathed in and centered himself. The glow did not come from force, it came from discipline. Vance saw it and grew more impatient, which only made the shadows around him twitch harder. He shouted for his men, but the chamber had a different answer. The sacred marks on the wall began to shine in a circle, and the room revealed what it had been hiding for centuries. The seal was not flat stone at all. It was a layered lock built to hold back a moving threshold, a hidden crossing point that could either keep the void trapped below or let it spill upward if broken. The twist struck like cold water. The shrine had not been guarding a simple prison. It had been guarding a doorway made to look like a prison because the builders had hoped to confuse anyone who came after them. Krishna saw it at once and his face stayed calm, but the others could feel the weight of that truth. If they forced the seal open, they might not find an enemy inside. They might find a path. Vance laughed at the revelation because to him it proved everything he wanted. He said the builders had been afraid of progress and he was not. He reached toward the crack and the chamber answered with a deep tremor that shook dust from the ceiling. Arjuna stepped in front of him, blade raised, not to strike with cruelty, but to block the path. The two men clashed in a sharp burst of steel and force, and the sound rang through the stone room like a warning bell. Vance fought with hunger and anger, using raw pressure and quick, harsh movements. Arjuna fought with balance and patience, keeping his feet planted, his shoulders low, and his mind clear. The iron oath blade flared each time he held back panic and refused to overreach. Krishna moved through the side of the chamber, speaking low and fast to the priest because the old seal still needed a final choice. The priest realized then that his whole life had led to this one moment. He had spent decades guarding the shrine as if silence alone could save it, but silence had also left it vulnerable to men like Vance. He gave Krishna the missing stone key from beneath his robe, a small object carved with the same sacred marks as the wall. He had hidden it because he feared anyone who loved power would use it without understanding the cost. Krishna placed the key into the center of the seal, and the room answered with a deep hum. At once, the doorway shape beneath the floor became clearer, and a narrow line of blue light rose around its edge. The void pressed back hard, and all of Ash Hollow seemed to hold its breath above them. Vance saw the light and charged harder, desperate to force the opening before the seal could settle again. Arjuna met him head-on, and this time the battle was not about winning through force. It was about buying time. The room shook, the shadows surged, and the dark pressure from below pushed against every wall at once. The priest nearly fell, but Krishna steadied him with one hand and spoke a simple truth into his ear. The shrine had not failed. It had held for centuries because people like him had refused to let fear decide the future. Then Krishna told Arjuna to trust the blade not as a weapon of attack, but as a key of discipline. Arjuna lowered his stance, turned the sword just so, and let the silver-blue light meet the line of the seal. The response was immediate. The dark pressure stopped rising, then recoiled as if the void had touched something it did not understand. Vance was driven back by the sudden surge, his cloak snapping around him as he stumbled toward the stairway. He did not retreat because he had changed his mind. He retreated because the chamber had refused him. But even as he fell back, he smiled through the strain and warned them that this was only one gate, and there were others hidden far beyond the hill. That warning changed the air in the room. It meant the problem was wider than the shrine, wider than Ash Hollow, and maybe wider than any of them had guessed. When the pressure finally eased, the chamber did not feel safe, but it did feel controlled. The seal remained intact, though the line of blue light around it stayed open like an eye that had not yet decided whether to sleep. Arjuna lowered the iron oath blade slowly, and the glow around it faded to a steady pulse. He looked at Krishna, and for the first time that night, he understood the difference between bravery and force. Bravery had nothing to do with charging first. It had to do with staying clear when fear tried to make the choice for you. Krishna gave him a small nod, as if to say he had learned the right lesson. The priest, exhausted but relieved, admitted that he had spent years protecting a secret instead of preparing people to face it. That mistake had nearly cost them everything. He promised to tell the truth to the people above ground because hiding danger had only made it easier for Vance to use. Outside, Ash Hollow remained quiet under the pines, but the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt watchful. Somewhere beyond the shrine, Vance was already regrouping, and somewhere deeper below the seal, the void still waited with patient hunger. Krishna looked down at the crack one last time and said the next step would not be about opening or closing alone. It would be about finding who built the first door, where the other hidden gates were buried, and why the void had started listening again. Arjuna stood beside him, steady now in body and spirit, and though the night was far from over, he was no longer the same man who had entered the chamber. He was ready to keep going, not because the road was easy, but because the truth was finally worth the cost. And above them, the cold wind moved through the pine trees like a warning that the next part of the story had already begun. The night over Ash Hollow had gone very still, but that calm did not bring peace. It brought fear because the hill's shrine had already opened one buried door, and everyone now knew that more gates were hiding beneath the stone. The cold wind moved through the pine trees, brushed across the broken steps, and slipped into the open crack below the shrine like a living warning. Arjuna stood at the edge of the chamber entrance, his long black hair tied back, his blue and gold armor marked by dust and stress, and his sharp eyes fixed on the dark opening ahead. He was no longer the same warrior who had come here searching for answers out of duty alone. Now he wanted the truth because the truth might be the only thing that could stop the void from waking fully. Beside him stood Krishna, a wise man with dark hair, calm bright eyes, and yellow and blue robes that seemed to hold their own steady light. Krishna had guided Arjuna through fear, doubt, and the first great test below the shrine, and he knew that the next steps would matter even more. The priest was there too, an elderly man with white hair, thin shoulders, and a solemn face that carried the weight of ancient vows. He guarded the shrine not because he was strong, but because he understood what was buried there and what would happen if the seals were broken in the wrong order. All three of them knew the danger now. The first door had been opened, and the void had started listening again. The priest lifted one shaking hand and touched the stone wall beside the opening. He explained in a low voice that the shrine had not been built to hide treasure. It had been built to hide choices. Long ago, when the first seal was made, the people of the hill understood that the void could not be fought like an army. It grew when panic spread, when greed shaped fear into action, and when a person tried to command what should only be respected. That was why the gates were buried in layers. Each door was a test of discipline, and each test forced the seeker to face their own inner weakness before they could move deeper. The priest looked at Arjuna while he spoke, because Arjuna now carried the same burden that had once crushed older guardians. If the remaining seals were opened carelessly, the void would not simply escape. It would begin to spread through memory, thought, and trust, until every person in Ash Hollow saw their own worst fear as truth. Krishna placed a calm hand on Arjuna's shoulder and said that this was why the first victory mattered. It was not power that had opened the door. It was patience, trust, and a willingness to stand still when fear demanded motion. Arjuna listened, and though his face stayed hard, something inside him settled. He understood at last that strength without control would only help the darkness. Then the ground answered them. A deep tremor rolled through the chamber floor, and dust drifted from the ceiling in fine gray lines. The first door, still open behind them, gave off a cold silver glow from the awakened iron-oath blade resting in its stone cradle. The blade was wrapped in iron bands, ancient and sacred, and its silver and blue light now pulsed in short, careful beats like a heart waking from sleep. Arjuna had touched it only once before, and he had felt how strict it was, how it responded only to perfect discipline and clear intent. That was when Krishna noticed the change in the air. The shadows near the far wall thickened, then bent inward, and a narrow crack of blackness formed in the stone as if the chamber itself was trying to remember another shape. The void was listening just as the priest had feared. From far above, a sharp sound rang through the pine trees like metal striking rock. The priest went pale because he knew that sound. Someone else had entered the shrine grounds. Then Vance appeared at the mouth of the outer stair, his dark hair falling across his hard stare, his black armor cut with crimson lines, and his heavy cloak moving like a banner of war. He walked with arrogance, but his face showed more than pride. It showed hunger. Vance wanted the iron oath blade because he believed the blade could make him untouchable. He wanted the buried seals because he believed fear could be shaped into obedience. He did not seek order, he sought control, and he had waited until the door was opened so he could follow the trail into the heart of the shrine. Vance stepped into the chamber with a slow smile and called down to them that the shrine had wasted enough time. He said the world was already broken and only someone ruthless enough could remake it. He spoke with smooth confidence, but the priest answered him at once, telling him that the seals were never meant for conquest. They were meant to hold back a force that feeds on panic, lies, and domination. Vance laughed and said that fear was useful, not evil, because frightened people obeyed faster. Then he pointed at Arjuna and said that the warrior had already proved one thing by opening the first door. He had done the hard work, and now someone stronger should take what came next. Arjuna tightened his grip on himself, not the sword, because Krishna had taught him to breathe first and react later. That small choice mattered because Vance wanted him angry. The void always grew when emotion ruled reason, and Vance knew how to use that. He began to climb down the steps toward the chamber floor, and with each step the air grew colder. The shadows behind him lengthened into rough shapes, and the cracked stone near the wall widened into another hidden seam. The second gate was close. Vance had not come only for the blade. He had come because he had learned the shrine reacted to pressure, and he believed he could force the next gate open by feeding it enough conflict. Krishna moved before Arjuna did. He stepped between Vance and the blade, his robe's sleeves brushing the floor, his eyes steady and sad. He told Vance that power taken without discipline would never remain under control, because the void did not serve the greedy. It fed on them. For a brief moment, Vance looked almost offended, as if someone had insulted his very right to decide the fate of others. He answered by striking the stone with the end of his gauntlet, and the sound shook the room. The hidden seam in the wall cracked wider, and black mist began to seep out in thin ribbons. The chamber reacted, just as he had wanted. The priest shouted for everyone to hold still, because the seals could be damaged if the wrong emotion spread too far. But the void had already begun to reach through the fresh crack, and the darkness moved like something curious, something waking. Arjuna finally stepped forward, not with rage, but with focus. He lifted the iron oath blade from its cradle, and the silver and blue light flared across his armor and cloak. The weapon felt heavy, but honest. It did not give him comfort, it gave him responsibility. As he held it, the blade seemed to judge him and approve him at once, because he was finally standing with a clear mind. Vance saw that approval, and his smile faded. He had expected strength. He had not expected discipline. The second gate opened only partway, and what appeared behind it was worse than a locked room. It was a narrow passage lined with more sacred markings, but the walls were covered in scratched names, old warnings, and signs of failed attempts from generations past. The priest explained that many guardians had tried to force this path before, and most had failed by trusting pride over patience. At the far end of the passage stood a stone ring, and inside the ring floated a dark mirror of moving shadow. It did not move like smoke, it moved like thought. Krishna said quietly that this was the listening place, where the void first learned the shape of a person before it tried to wear their fear. That was the real reason the first door had mattered. It had not only opened a path, it had awakened attention, and now the void knew Arjuna was here. That was the twist none of them had expected. The shrine was not just a prison. It was also a test mirror, and every sealed gate was designed to reveal the weak heart of whoever entered. Vance tried to laugh again, but the sound came out thin. He had wanted a weapon, yet the shrine was exposing him instead. The shadow ring reacted to his greed first, and a dark wave rushed outward, forcing him back 2 steps. For one brief, sharp moment, Arjuna saw the truth in Vance clearly. He was not brave. He was terrified of being powerless, and that fear had turned into hunger for control. That understanding changed the battle. Arjuna did not rush Vance. He raised the iron oath blade, planted his feet, and held his breath the way Krishna had taught him. The blade answered with a clean silver pulse, and the chamber light sharpened around him. He did not strike wildly. He drew one controlled line through the air, and the blade cut the dark wave apart without scattering it. Krishna then spoke the old vow aloud, his voice calm and firm, and the sacred markings on the passage wall lit one after another, like stars waking in order. The priest joined him, repeating the final words with a voice full of age and regret. Their voices steadied the chamber. The void shivered, pulled back, and the shadow ring closed halfway, unable to feed on the calm they had made. Vance, furious now, tried to force himself forward, but the floor under him answered with a hard stone shift and pushed him back toward the steps. He caught himself, snarling, his cloak sweeping the dust, and he glared at Arjuna as if the warrior had stolen something personal. In truth, Arjuna had done something far more important. He had chosen control over pride. That choice made the blade brighter and made Vance weaker. Yet the danger was not over, because the ring in the passage had not closed fully. A second path deeper below the shrine had just begun to show itself, and from that deeper darkness came a soft, terrible sound, like a door breathing open somewhere far below. Krishna looked at Arjuna, and the priest looked at the floor, and all three understood the same thing at once. They had won the chamber, but they had only reached the edge of the next truth. The night was still alive, the void was still listening, and the road downward had finally revealed its next step. Ash Hollow sat under a moonless sky with cold pine trees bending around the old shrine. The stone paths were empty, but the air still felt alive with fear. Deep below the shrine, Arjuna, Krishna, and the priest faced a new danger because the void had not been sealed, only pushed back. If they failed now, the darkness would crawl out into the town and spread through every safe place above. Arjuna stood first with long black hair, sharp eyes, and royal armor shining in weak blue light. He held the iron oath blade with both hands, and its silver bands trembled as if they knew the way down. Krishna, with dark hair and calm bright eyes, stayed close beside him, because he understood that the blade answered only to clear hearts and steady minds. The priest, a thin elderly man with white hair and pale robes, led them to the open crack in the floor, and his voice stayed low as he said the second path had been hidden to protect the final seal. Then the truth struck hard. Vance had not come for gold or revenge alone. The dark-haired man in black armor wanted the void to notice him because he believed it would make him stronger than every ruler and guardian above. He stepped from the side passage with a cruel smile, but the chamber answered him with a deep breath of shadow. The void did not serve him. It fed on his hunger, and the walls began to bend under its pull. Arjuna raised the blade, but Krishna stopped him with one calm hand. The priest revealed the last warning carved into the stone. The seal could not be forced by strength, only completed by trust between the three of them. So Arjuna lowered his anger, Krishna guided his focus, and the priest spoke the old vow aloud. The blade flared with silver and blue light, then cut through the dark mist without striking flesh. The chamber shook once, then went still. Vance was driven back into the lower passage, where the void folded around him like a closing storm. The hidden door sealed behind him, and the shrine above finally grew quiet. Arjuna looked at the blade, then at Krishna and the priest, and for the first time he understood that true power was not control. It was trust, discipline, and the choice to protect others before himself.